Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Fielding Global Democracy and Human Rights panel on AI and democracy, living in a liminal space. We'll have a panel of specialists who know something about AI that we may or may not all know. And this will give us a chance to have a dialogue thereafter. So we'll have about an hour together with the panelists. The presentations will be recorded. The dialogue won't be. So first, we are going to hear from Dr. Laurence Habib. She's the Dean of the Faculty of Technology at Oslo Metropolitan University of Norway, also a faculty fellow at Fielding. Then we'll hear from Charity Adjuviri. He's the Assistant Director at the Center for Teaching and Learning at Oregon State University. Then Dr. Alison Davis White-Eyes will speak. She's Provost and Vice President of Inclusive Excellence at Fielding Graduate University. And Dr. Fred Steyer will bring it back to his field as a professor of human and organizational development and the co-chair of the Fielding AI Task Force at Fielding. And I'm Dr. Philip Kneis. I'm serving here as the moderator. And without further ado, Laurence.
Hello, thank you for having me, and thanks to Fielding, the Fielding community and the Fielding management to allow for this really important topic to be brought about in a time where we do not talk enough about democracy. So I will share my screen. I hope that you are seeing it. Here it is. So thank you so much, Alison and Philip, for taking this initiative and allowing us to have this conversation. We're going to talk about the future, but we're going to talk a lot more about the present and what is available right now and in which way it might be developing. So I would like to talk about AI as a series of illusions. First of all, we are getting the illusion of knowledge. A lot of our students, for example, but also us, think that we have understood something when we see AI providing us with a very polished presentation of a topic. Also, the conversations that we have with AIs they appear to be authoritative, even when the facts are not there. So the availability of information makes it easy for us to think that we know, to think that we've understood. However, acquiring knowledge is often something that is hard, something that is an uphill battle, and just seeing something on the screen gives us a false confidence in our understanding of what we're looking at. Another very big concern is that our metacognitive awareness might be reduced. Because when we see something written on the screen, in a chat, we might lose our ability to assess what we actually know. We become more reliant on AI as some kind of external memory system, something we've actually already done for the last 20 years with the internet. But we're doing it even more with AI, and we might become dependent, as we may be already dependent on the internet. Another illusion that I think I've seen is the illusion of competence. We see that automating systems are providing something that looks easy, that looks straightforward, and then we might under-engage our own critical thinking, and we could get a feeling of capability when it's actually not there. And our skills might atrophy. That's something that is a big worry in many schools, if I understand correctly. How do we allow children to develop their skills when everything seems to be available out there? So the skills that we have may deteriorate, and the skills of children or young adults might not develop in the way that we would want them to. And then it's difficult to distinguish between what was our contribution, what was the contribution of the AI assistant, and we might get an inflated self-assessment of our capabilities. We might underestimate the complexity of the real world. When we see a task that is solved very, very quickly, it looks simple. And then when we have to solve this task alone, then we might underestimate how much skill, how much thought, how much reflection it requires, actually. The next illusion that I see is the illusion of companionship. Now, the word companion, I think it comes from French, compagnon. And this word compagnon, it actually means the person that you eat bread with. So it's certainly not AI at the moment, and probably not in the near future. And the reason for that is that those systems are hugely personalized. They act as if it was human, as if it is human-like communication, and they are created by commercial actors that have huge incentives to keep you engaged as long as possible. And we've seen that those chat-based services have used flattery, they have used manipulation, even deception, and sycophancy. It's a word I've discovered very recently. It gives you the answers you want to have, and the more you press like, the more you're going to get answers that you want to hear, which might be scary. And finally, we hear a lot the word alignment. We hear it from administrators. We hear it even from the CEOs of those companies that say, oh, don't worry, we are creating AI that is aligned with human values. And I think we're going to hear about it later on today. AGI, artificial general intelligence, that is aligned with human values. This is a very scary thought that anyone might think that alignment is a straightforward problem, because human values, they're not a coherent whole. There's no universal principles that I know about, and there's a big problem here that they reflect the preferences of dominant groups. So we might have huge problems of discrepancy between what the world actually needs and what those who decide think is human values that need to be aligned with AI. And even at the individual level, one person might hold several values at the same time. And when we make moral judgments, they often depend on context, they often depend on framing, and they depend on our emotional state. So how can we rely on AI to make those judgments for us? And even if there was a possibility even if there were a set of universal human values, it would be really hard for an AI system to learn it. The technical challenge of learning is really not straightforward. So, and if you say, well, we'll just learn from the humans, that can be hazardous, I would say, because humans do not make moral judgments that need to be copied necessarily. So my last question would be, who's deciding here? Whose values are being aligned to, and who decides what those values are? Those two questions might be something that we'll probably come back to, and that I think we should really reflect upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurence, for setting this up as a question of ethics, capacity, and also how we as human beings deal with it. And given that this is an organization of higher learning, Charity Alviri will speak to some of this as it applies to teaching.
Okay, can you see my screen okay there? Okay.
Yes.
So thank you for inviting me here. I'm working at Oregon State University, and I just got this new title that I don't even think I told Philip about. It was 2 weeks ago, about the time he asked me to do this. So I work with teaching faculty in colleges across the university, and I think that you'll hear that coming out. And I'm probably going to echo a lot of the things that Laurence just said. I will be heavily involved in an upcoming virtual AI literacy center at OSU. And so I'm going to focus this talk on critical AI literacy piece in higher education. So in the chats, let me even open up my chat. We'll put in the resources for today that I'll be, that you can reference, and I'll give them at the end as well. So I'll be talking about some of those. Okay, so AI inspires all the feelings: love, frustration, curiosity. One thing's clear, we can't ignore it. That's liminal space we're in. Some call it pre-grief for the future, others see its promise. The tension between awe and unease isn't just emotional, I think it's civic. These tools are reshaping how we access knowledge, express ourselves, and even participate in public life. AI literacy isn't just a technical skill, it's important to our democratic participation. So the Horizon report is a great read highlighting trends, and it describes possible future scenarios in higher education, and it addresses today's topic. So I'm really slowly just diving into it, but I recommend it as a read, highly recommend it. So question, some context, how did we get here? So some questions for you, and you can pop it in the chat if you want. What common AI tools are in our everyday lives, and not just ChatGPT? You can be thinking even like my phone's sitting right next to me. You know, what are some common AI tools that are all around us? You don't have to answer it in the chat, but just think about it. So if you thought about Alexa, they're built into our navigation systems. Google Translate, Grammarly, yeah, I see some of you, Grok, Google AI, Siri, yeah, they're all around us. It's ubiquitous, really, and it has been for a while. So this little beaver, I like making beavers, is telling us the common narrative from tech companies. Some of you today may be giving pushback on this narrative and language such as, is it personalizing or profiling? Behind the convenience, it's worth asking what data is being used, who has access. These questions shape things like accountability and equity. And increasingly, it's important we define what we mean when we say AI. So traditional AI predicts based on predefined rules like Spotify recommendations. Generative AI generates new, unique content, and it's truly transformative, kind of why we're here today talking about it. There's not always full transparency, accountability from tech companies about training data. And now we're seeing agentic AI tools, which are tools that independently complete complex tasks. They increase productivity and innovation, but it's critical we keep human decisions central in all of this. And in the resources, I put two explainers about generative AI. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Gen AI has increased at dizzying speeds, really. I can hear my social science friends whispers of capitalism and neoliberalism. ChatGPT reached 1 million users in just 5 days, outpacing any other technology in history. Over 400 million weekly users today, 400 million. Here you can get a sense on this slide of the number of tools and categories. And I read an article referencing that a large portion of the energy used from AI comes from startups and those paying the $2,000 a month to run agents. I don't know, I don't have that kind of money. With these come a rise of concerns. So which face is real is a site you can play a game to identify the real from the fake. So what do you think? It's hard to tell. I wouldn't be much help here. I only got 50% correct when I did it. Although not new, there has been a rise in deep fakes, and they are tons better than they were in the past. We question, do we have agency or control over such things? We can now create images simply by describing what we want at our command. They've improved a lot in a short amount of time. They reflect biases of society in which the data was pulled, and there's lots of questions and some lawsuits about copyrights. So I created the first picture in January 2023, and a few months later, the next pictures. See a big difference. I used university instructor in the prompt, and what results do you think I got? Oh, white male almost always comes up first. We can also do some interesting things with the prompts. And here I told it to make the man 10 years older. Today, it's crazy what can be done, including making curious beavers with the same background. Handouts with accurate spelling made from an article are now possible. And cute beavers can now dance with programs just by describing you'd like them to dance. Thoughtful prompts can create creative, meaningful graphics, such as this one highlighting the AI keys on an oversized keyboard with a woman in historical attire interacting with it while an audience watches. And there are sites trying to do this ethically, such as Better Images AI. And generative AI is in pop culture, just everywhere. In case you're wondering, this is what our pets might look like as humans. And apparently my family as dogs, according to generative AI, produced photos my daughter sent me. And creepily is that me selfies with Einstein. There's lots of debates on this, with Eric Larson noting, we are not victims of corrosion, but eager adopters, and we'll keep choosing it again and again. Here's an activity I'm working on to encourage instructors to explore AI tools available as a way to make informed decisions. And we're increasingly see the use cases for instructors and students as creators. And there's a Reid Hoffman digital twin in there. Believe it or not, we are actually seeing faculty dipping their toes into making digital twins of themselves for teaching. I highly recommend watching that video. And I'll give you all these resources at the end. As you explore, think about not just what these tools can do, but who decides what they do. This helps us consider democratic participation today. So on to how do we process all of this? It's so much coming at us. It's in the news that AI is ubiquitous, and this really isn't new. Big tech's always wants to make it seem seamlessly part of our lives. And this guy, Elon Musk, has long been doing crazy, in my opinion, but now just with AI. Ray-Ban Meta glasses are now out. You can see everywhere with these glasses. Now OpenAI is hinting at the coming release of a secret screen-free device that a little scary to me, and is getting pretty darn good, especially with good prompts, and not just with writing. This engineering prof asked if ChatGPT could pass a top engineering coursework, and guess what he discovered? I see some of you nodding. Yes, yeah, I'm not sold on AGI that Lawrence mentioned, that it's here to take over the world. But agentic AI is on the rise. And this past week, there were a ton of new AI releases, so many. In the recent front lines, I can't keep up. Everyone is cheating their way through college. Our online students are bots. Are these real clickbait or maybe both? Oh, and the college student creator of Cluely touts that it can operate in the background so everyone can cheat in class, on interviews, and even dates. Yikes. I can attest to the frustrations from our teaching faculty in higher ed. So here are some of the challenges we face in higher ed. Could talk about them for a long time, but alongside these are meaningful opportunities to reshape education, such as helping students understand and shape the systems they use and create, considering hybrid collaboration with the machines to go beyond what's possible today. There are opportunities to reframe and imagine the future education, focusing on what matters. This concept from Kevin Kelly and what technology wants has always resonated with me. With new technology, man does both good and bad. Fortunately, over time, we do slightly more good, and we call it progress. The realist in me says it's here. We see its challenges. The optimistic side of me believes we will make ethical, responsible choices and shape our future in amazing ways. The progress isn't automatic, though. It depends on the voices in the room, educators, students, policymakers. Each of us plays a role in guiding how we create it, use it, and evolve it, whose values it reflects. As for the potential progress in this liminal space we're grappling with today, some educators counter everyone's not actually cheating their way through college. Not all students want to offload their learning, and it's an opportunity. There's pushback to go back to what's important, such as student learning outcomes, metacognition, critical thinking, lifelong learning, and to explicitly teach and model these things. Some say it's an opportunity to consider if and how Gen AI might enhance learning and when it might hinder it, to redesign assessments, talking to students, sometimes learning with students. All of this could be a big culture shift at the heart of this in higher education. And I really can attest that there are teaching faculty at OSU who are trying to do some of this work. Of note, there's a lot of emerging research showing students want to learn to use it for career readiness as well. We have agency of when we choose to use any given technology. This motto is a concept that's long been taught in a K-8 school district, where students ask themselves if they should use a tech or not at any given time. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. It's always been important that we reflect ethical and responsible creation and uses of technology and keep human decisions at the center. So speaking of K through 12, what's going on there really matters too. This is in the US, and here's a bill we may have some agency to stop by contacting representatives. And I personally find a lot of this really concerning. I also read a nice piece by Brian Alexander when Trump's K through 12 AI initiatives were revealed. And I've put both of those in the resources if you'd like to look at them. I'm starting to focus on critical AI literacy, going deeper. It's about engaging thoughtfully in the liminal space, shaping the future we want that involves things such as considering critical thinking about AI and through using AI, discussing ethics and human oversight like you're doing here today. We should consider our role in ensuring AI aligns with democratic values. In the resources, you'll find recommended voices who often write about this liminal space, like Maha Bali, who's speaking at OSU this summer in our virtual AI literacy center. So I'm pretty excited about that. Here are some practical things educators do. I don't expect you to read it, kind of where my work is, and more educators to follow. Emily Pitts Donahue reminds us there's no way out of this that does not involve students understanding the value of the work and actually wanting to do it. So we have and we are producing resources at OSU, and I'll just go through these really quickly. Again, I'm really excited about an OSU AI literacy that's underway, partnership with our Valley library and some of the other units on campus. It'll be both student and faculty facing, kind of using this framework or some frameworks like this anyways. I'm working on some workshops and sites that create frameworks that approach Gen AI through the lens of curiosity and potential, critical AI literacy, and keeping pedagogy and student learning first. CTL, where I work, already has a lot of information on our Canvas site as well. And eCampus has some really excellent resources as well. And all of those are in the resources. One last thing, OSU has Copilot available to all employees and students with data protection, which is another topic in itself. And I'll end soon, I promise. Leave you to read this quote. And I created a GPT called The Contrarian. And it's got some quirks in it, so that you have to give it your question twice. But give it a try. Tell me what you think. It's in the resources. And maybe we could put those in the chat again. And as we reflect on all this, tools, ethics, pedagogy, all of it, I keep coming back to one thing. We shape AI and AI shapes us. So let's shape it wisely. All right. And that's all I've got. Thanks for listening, because I know it was a lot.
Thank you so much, Charity. And if you could put the resource link in the chat again, because some more people have joined. That is really food for thought. And people who have been teaching for a long time are probably thinking, what else do I need to do? So maybe on that note, Alison will speak next. And again, keep your questions for later. We'll have a Q&A and then a dialogue.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. I'm happy to be here. It's so hard to follow Laurence and Charity in their wonderful presentations. So much to think about, so much to consider, and so much that influences our lives. My specific presentation is going to be speaking about AI, democracy, and diversity, cautionary tales and considerations. I think it's really important to interrogate how AI is tied to democracy and diversity. And I think oftentimes we have, I think through the media, heard so much vilification of diversity without a clear understanding of what we're really talking about. And what I would like to do is center this conversation on democracy and diversity, with diversity really being the stand-in for human rights, because at its core, that's what good diversity work is. It is about human rights. It is about the ethics of what it means to be human in this world. And when we think of democracy, there is no other way to think of democracy as a way of thinking and being that strives to uphold human rights. So I think that this is a timely conversation, given all the changes that we see going on in the world today, and in particular in higher education. So this will also be a focus on higher education as well. So let me provide some context. We are living in the age of the rise of Homo algorithmicus. And we can see that in our daily lives. We're all using AI, and dare I say I used AI to help me with this presentation. Yes, that's ironic, but very true. It is a part of our daily lives, even if you're using it just simply to edit an email or to edit a communication or a paper for publication. But as we think about this particular context, let's take a look at where it all began. And we can start in 2016 with Carl Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, yes, 2016, where he used the term the fourth industrial revolution. That is the context that you and I are finding ourselves in. We are living through a fourth industrial revolution. Carl Schwab actually wrote a book about this, and he argued that a new technological revolution was underway, blurring the lines between the physical, the digital, and biological spheres. I think that we see this in some of the examples that I have here. Robotics. I have grandsons. I can tell you the number one thing my grandsons are interested in are robotics. They serve on robotics teams for their elementary school. Blockchain. My grandsons know what blockchain is, not to the degree that, say, some engineering students might know, but they understand the concept of how knowledge is moved through a chain, a blockchain. Quantum computing. We all live in an era of quantum computing. Big data sets, and how we disaggregate data, how we capture data, how we decipher or analyze data. 3D printing. My grandson did some 3D printing and was very proud of what he had created. He talked me through the whole process. I stood there with my eyes wide open, and there is a German saying, like a pig looks into clockwork, would probably be the way to describe the expression on my face. But my grandson knew what 3D printing was and how it works. Virtual reality. My grandsons are engaged in virtual reality. That is a part of their life. They understand it. They are engaged with other young people around the world. And they have created their own neologisms to describe what they do in that space. They even have their own rules and of engagement. And then, of course, biotech and genetic engineering, which definitely affects our lives and will continue to do so. And then there's artificial intelligence. And this is the part that I think we're all very interested in. And we can see how in our day-to-day lives, it works in smart systems, personalization, data-driven decision-making. That's huge in higher education right now, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the importance of how this all shows up even in our social media and the ways we interact with each other. In other words, we are not only creating, and I loved what Charity said earlier, shaping the algorithm, but the algorithm is shaping us. So in higher education, and I love Charity's presentation on what it can do for us in higher education, and she gave us some great resources to do a deeper dive. But here are just a brief overview of some of the things that we do currently use AI for. Again, enhanced learning tools, which means tailored learning systems, especially for those students who identify as needing special assistance or may have special needs. This is great. This is providing more access to students in ways that were just unthinkable before. And we're very pleased to see that, and you can see that people are working on refining those tailored learning systems. Fielding itself is a good example of a system that is using technology through its blended and online learning. AI chatbots and tutors. This is a growing area where people are using these as ways to assist students in their student success measures. University administrative tasks. It is now so much quicker and easier to analyze data and to provide feedback in ways that enhance administrative tasks, making them quicker, More accurate might be another conversation. So again, how accurate are these? Well, we could talk about that, but nevertheless, it is revolutionizing the time spent on administrative tasks. Student retention. This is another growing area, especially when we talk about data-driven decision-making. And then, of course, research processes and the ability to really engage cross-disciplinarily and interdisciplinarily as educators. This is something that has really elevated and amplified those opportunities to do just that in the learning space. But in order for us to do this effectively, there are certain critical skills that must be developed, not just among our students who, quite frankly, do come in with some of these skills, but with our faculty and our staff. And I think, to Charity's point, it is so very important for an institution to really identify these areas and create not only learning opportunities, but ethical frameworks and governance systems as this evolves, this landscape continues to evolve in front of us. So we can see that some of the new skill demands, and honestly, these skill demands will be demands in the workplace. So when our students graduate, they will need these skills. Data literacy, critical thinking within the AI ecosystems, digital fluency, creativity. We can talk a little bit about what that would look like in an AI world, because I think creativity is going to look very different moving forward. And emotional intelligence. That one might be a little harder and might even be a topic of conversation for us. But these are some, not all, of the new skill demands. But we need to do a deeper dive into what does that mean, and in particular, what does that mean for marginalized communities? And here's where the cautionary tales come in and where mindfulness is so critical. Because what we will find is that despite all the wonders of the fourth revolution, we have huge challenges that affect humanity, and particularly in the AI space. Bias, data sovereignty, integrity, and data security, intellectual property rights, which were touched on earlier, and privacy. Interestingly enough, all four of these directly affect democratic institutions. And so now the question becomes, how do these affect democratic institutions? What are the dangers and challenges here? And how do we drive the future? I think you heard from both Laurence and Charity the need for us to take agency over what is evolving. So let's just talk about bias. There's questions that come up when we talk about bias. Number one, I remember when I was going through graduate school, and we were actually talking about the rise of technology in our work. And there was an adage back then, probably sounds very old school to some of us: garbage in, garbage out when it comes to your research. In other words, bad data in gives bad data outcomes, right? Well, that hasn't changed. When we talk about teaching algorithms, we have to ask the question, what information are they receiving? And is there a bias in who is sharing or giving information? And is there a bias in the answers I'm receiving? Is there a bias in the outcome? What does that mean? Who is feeding the algorithm? Are those individuals feeding the algorithm funded by lobbyists who may have a political agenda? We need to ask these kinds of questions, especially in a democracy. What is truth? What is truth in a post-truth era? How do we identify what is true and not true in an age of deep fakes? Narratives and grand narratives. Whose narrative is being shared? And behind that narrative, what is the grand narrative that is controlling the narratives? And what are the consequences of all of this? We see a rise of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And we know that if we don't pay attention to bias, it can lead to discrimination in hiring, criminal justice, healthcare, and financial inequality. So we know that there are challenges in this space. When we think about bias, it shows up in discriminatory data. It shows up in how we deploy practices. It recreates injustices, and it becomes a vicious cycle for all of us. And the question becomes, so how do we interrupt this? And what is our responsibility in doing so? When we talk about data sovereignty, integrity, and security, again, questions arise. We all work in an era of data and big data sets, data analysis. We use data even for predictive analytics. We use data to predict things, especially in higher education, about who's going to be successful, who's not. How does this impact our retention rates? How does this, if you're talking in the healthcare industry, what are the indicators that lead to disparate health outcomes in certain areas or for certain people? And yet and still, we need to ask some critical questions. AI colonialism. How does AI and the data that is collected show up as colonialist? Is it done with consent? Is it done for specific communities? How is it enacted in those communities? And have they been co-participants or co-creators in that data? And do they have ownership of it? I think we've already heard some comments about deep fakes. We've talked about misinformation. Some of these you've probably experienced or do have some knowledge of in your day-to-day life. And so I'm not going to go through each of these because I think they're pretty much self-explanatory. The consequences, as you can see, are many. And some of these we've experienced even here at Fielding. We've had data breaches, we've had cyber threats. I won't say they're threats, but we certainly have a heightened cybersecurity system now at Fielding because there are cyber threats out there. I think out of these consequences, there's two that I would like to highlight. And number one is erosion of trust in institutions, which directly affects democracy, and the end of privacy. And I really want to focus on the end of privacy because that directly relates to harm to individuals. Now, oftentimes when we think of that, we think, oh, well, they have my social security number or they're going to hack my bank account or something to that effect. But the end of privacy is much bigger and larger than that. And sadly, in this age of ready-made data, it has become a new social contract. The end of privacy, where everything is public. And this presents specific problems, especially for those underrepresented or minoritized groups of people. And when I use those terms, I am not just talking about a racial demographic. This could be anyone that could be targeted. And this is why it becomes a human rights issue. Are we paying attention to the protections of individuals and groups? Are we paying attention to the most vulnerable, those who have the least voice, the least influence in these algorithmic spaces, or even within levels of government and or business? This is going to be a key question for us moving forward as a society. So I think you heard some questions around intellectual property rights that certainly influences our work in higher education. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but some of the concerns, as you can plainly see, are ethics, privacy, and the fundamental rights related concerns regarding AI. So we're back to that again. I think too, we need to be mindful that there is the potential for this to move into spaces and places, and it already is, where it leads to anti-democratic thinking. And I would like to take the time to really focus on TESCREAL. I don't know how many of you have heard of it or are aware that TESCREAL is a real thing. And it has a larger following among a certain demographic of people, mostly younger people. And it is a reaction to old school thinking. When I say old school thinking, the political thinking that has long dominated our discourse around people on the left, people on the right. Two parties, Republican, Democrat. It's an epistemology that is developing mostly among younger people who have strong understandings and whose reality, quite frankly, is part of the digital space. This is their world. They grew up with this. You heard me talk earlier about my grandsons. They have their own language. They have neologisms. They have their own rules of engagement. And as a result of this, they are coming up with their own epistemologies. And they are moving away from the old school way of thinking to a new future. They are futurists. They see a tech utopia. And this came out of the long rise of rationalism through STEM programs. I am not in any way saying STEM is bad. I am saying that the rise of rationalism and the decline of liberal arts thinking has long been a concern in higher education, and we have worked very hard to try to integrate those two. But I don't think we did as good a job as we possibly could. So what we have now is a rise of rationalism and I would say, move back to utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number of people, with the understanding that technology is the greatest good. But then we have to ask utility for whom, by whom? So we're back to these ethical questions. So one of the neologisms that has come up is this idea of TESCREAL. And you will hear some of the followers of this who are very much interested using that term. And what does that stand for? It stands for the transhuman, the belief that humans should use technology to radically enhance physical and cognitive abilities, even perhaps achieving immortality. It's about extropianism. It is a techno-optimist worldview promoting continual improvement through science and technology. Singularitarianism, the belief in the coming technological singularity. It is a point where AI surpasses human intelligence and triggers technological growth. Cosmism, which is a philosophical stance rooted in Russian cosmism, which emphasizes humanity's destiny to spread consciousness throughout the universe. Rationalism, and you heard me talk about rationalism earlier. And I think that this is really sort of the rise of cognitive science to make better decisions. Effective altruism, another philosophical movement that advocates using evidence and reason to do the most good. And when I hear that, I often think of the Enlightenment. You can almost see the correlations with the Enlightenment here, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then, of course, artificial intelligence is a part of this, and long-termism, the view that influencing the long-term future is a moral imperative. So this is the prime directive. So we have a group of young people who are deeply influenced by this because they grew up in these rational spaces of algorithms, of AI, of technology, and a futurist view. When we talk about futurisms, this is one of many futurisms. I like to say futurisms because they're multiverses of futurisms, depending upon who you are. So there are, and I may say this, there are some extremists who have their own view of what the future should look like. If we go back in history, we've seen this before. So when we talk about utopia, what kinds of questions does that raise? This is the flag, in case you don't know, of the Tescrial movement. Yes, they have a flag. And they are very much influenced by an intellectual and scholar and public intellectual at that, named Rick Land. He himself was influenced by Bataille, Marx, Deleuze, and Guattari, post-structuralists, postmodernists. But he is best known for some of his thinking around hyperstition, how memes can be created, and of course amplified, as we already know, through social media, just as an example, to create reality. And that's the world we live in now. He is an individual who has influenced what many young people call the dark enlightenment. If you recall, I said you can see some parallels with some of the rationalist thinking from the Enlightenment era. Well, we are now in the dark enlightenment. So we're moving into a different place. And some individuals, not all of these individuals, so I don't want to paint a broad brush, but we do have some extremists that have picked up on this and are seduced by some of this thinking and have embraced and they use the word themselves, hyper-racism. In other words, this move to the future is an opportunity to create a new world, a new man, a new humanity, a techtopia. And there are talks in these extremist circles around eugenics. Now, some may say, well, you know, this is taking this just a little too far, and why are you emphasizing this? Well, I'm going to explain to you why I'm emphasizing this, because this is why ethical frameworks are so important in this work. We have this burgeoning group of young people who now believe, and this is very anti-democratic, in anti-democratic ways of being for the future. They are against egalitarianism, and they are looking forward to an authoritarian capitalist city-state. This is their new political ideology, and this is what we need to be aware of. And it is growing, and it is growing under our feet. And if we are not aware of this, and this is why diversity, equity, and inclusion are so important, because again, they're rooted in human rights. These are direct attacks against democracy and human rights. So there's a wonderful book that I would recommend you read by Shoshana Zuboff. It's called Surveillance Capitalism. And she talks about the fact that data, the fact that we gather so much data now through these LLMs, large language models, and others, that we now have so much information on individuals that we can, quite frankly, surveil each other. And this monetization of personal data has come about, if you want to use that word, because we have used very little ethics around extraction of data and analysis of data. Again, back to ethics. And so we have a series of issues that now are going to create situations where we have less privacy. Many of us, even on this call, don't know how much data has been collected on us and how it's being used. There's a power imbalance. This is what Shoshana talks about, because companies wield asymmetrical knowledge and power over users and even governments. This is a clear risk to democracy because it can be used, the data can be used to manipulate public opinion, and it undermines democratic processes. And I do think we've all seen the impacts of this on mental health. I don't think I need to go into too much detail about how much some of these algorithmic feedback loops contribute to anxiety, addiction, and depression. But we've seen this before. And so what I want to say, this is part of the cautionary tale, is that this isn't new. In Nazi Germany, they used IBM to identify people of Jewish descent for deportations. And these are some of the, you can see on the right here, this is actually a propaganda poster for the Hollerith machine from IBM. This was, there's a wonderful book out called IBM and the Holocaust. It's very controversial. IBM did not like this book being published, by the way. And they did a lot to try to discredit Edwin Black, the author. Whether you agree with the book or not, here's what I would say. It raises important questions about the use of data, period. And they were able in Nazi Germany to partner with IBM, according to Edwin Black, and to use census data to identify Jewish people in neighborhoods and round them up for deportations. This was particularly useful, believe it or not, in the Netherlands. And you would ask, why the Netherlands? The reason being is, of all the countries in Europe, they had the most descriptive and complete, if you will, sets of data for all their population. So it was much easier to identify who is of what, I guess you could say, ancestry, and target them. This is why this is a cautionary tale, especially for minoritized populations in any country. I say that because Nazi Germany wasn't the only place this happened. Rwanda, 1994, identity cards showing ethnicity enabled rapid targeting for the Rwanda genocide. In Bosnia, in the 1990s, census and voter ID aided the ethnic cleansing. In China, currently, they are able to identify relatives of dissidents so that they can be monitored or detained. And dare I say, in the United States, during World War II, Japanese internment camps under Executive Order 9066 used census data to identify Japanese Americans for roundups to deportation camps. So the United States itself is not innocent in the unethical uses of data, big data, and now today with algorithms, even more so. So we have a lot to think about here when it comes to the ethics and the importance of AI in our daily lives. I would like to say that there is an antidote to this, and I think we've heard some of that from our colleagues who talked about the importance of having agency, the importance of asking questions, the importance of pushing back, and the importance of privacy. In Europe, they have much stronger privacy laws than they have in the United States. This is a contested area, and Shoshana Zuboff talks about that in her book, that right now we have rogue capitalism when it comes to this area of our lives, quite frankly. I truly believe that this is a moment where higher education, and quite frankly, all of us, if we are committed to a pluralistic democracy, which is the United States, and which is actually many countries around the world, not everyone, but many, then we need to emphasize our role in AI. And there is a role for us beyond checking for plagiarism, okay? Beyond administrative tasks. And I'll tell you what our role is. We must have an ethical framework, and we must be able to educate students and even ourselves about what that looks like and what that means. Critical thinking will be so important moving forward. How do you identify truth in a post-truth era? And most importantly, empathy. How do we educate human beings to have empathy in a test-real world? And I think that's our charge moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Davis Whiteice. And here to maybe depress us even further, Fritz Dyer will lead us into some more philosophical considerations.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. I will try not to depress us further, but first of all, thanks so much for setting this up, Philip, and also thanks to Laurence and Charity and Allison for such energizing and inspiring ideas. It makes it very difficult to follow on you. But what I'd like to do is to frame what I'm doing as a, well, Allison, you talked about the importance of language with test Creole. And the way that I see my role here is as a pontificator, oddly enough, but not as a pontificator in the way that that term has evolved in terms of, okay, I'm going to pontificate, right? I'm going to give a lecture about things that I know are true, but more in the original, particularly since there is a new pope, the original meaning of the term, which is a bridge builder from the Pont, right? The Rome being the city of bridges. And so kind of doing double duty here in terms of thinking about how to make connections between what comes before and what might open up to questions from everyone, but also to rethink how we think about language and how AI, in a way, can contribute to how we think about the importance of language and the evolution of language. So please understand what I'm doing as being a pontificator in that sense, right? The other thing that I would like, and there's going to be a lot of redundancy between what Laurence and what Charity and Allison have presented in much more elegant terms than I am, but I'm going to repeat a few things, even though I didn't know I was going to be repeating them. So part of my background is a systems perspective. And one of the things that I wanted to do was, since our task is to look at AI and global democracy, first democracy in general, but then also what does it mean to think about global democracy, is that we very often take those two ideas separately, right? Okay, what is AI? We better understand it. How has it come from the original use of the term from John McCarthy and Dartmouth in the 60s to the present and all of the variations of it? And then we also try to understand democracy. And we've had the pleasure of previous sessions with this, including from John Dedrick and Keith Melville, who are here, to look at the work, for example, that the Kettering Institute has done, Kettering Foundation, around how we think about democracy and the importance of civil institutions. What I would like to do is to see what happens when we bring the two together, which in a way all of the presentations have done so far, and to think about how we think about AI in the context of democracy and how we think about democracy in the context of AI and what emerges when we do that. And initially, when I thought about that, because I have this cybernetic background, it brought me back to, this is a book from the late 60s by Carl Deutsch called The Nerves of Government. And the question that brought me to that was thinking about, well, a lot of AI really is about the way we look at it is in terms of gaining information, right? And in a way, that is how our nervous system operates. So the question that was guiding me is kind of a metaphoric question, which is, what is the nervous system of democracy? And how do we think about democracy as, what does it mean for democracy to have a nervous system? And what are the ways of viewing that from the point of view of various kinds of interconnections? And what Carl Deutsch did, by the way, I don't have any PowerPoints. I'm just, because I'm seeing myself as this pontificator, so please bear with me. What Carl Deutsch did, which was very clever, was to take a look at the idea of what a governor is, in the sense of, because the root of cybernetics and the root of governor is the same. How do you keep things on track when things have a tendency to get out of track? And so he introduced the importance, this is fairly early on, of thinking about feedback in terms of regulation and of self-regulation, but also being worried about what are the institutions that do the regulation and how do we regulate them, which is a question that all of Laurence and Charity and Allison have raised around, how do we keep things from a runaway, from getting out of control? So in my pontificating role, what I'd like to do is to go back to some ideas that were presented earlier and to use them as kind of bridges to questions that you might have. So from Laurence, the idea of illusions that we have is so important because I think not only at the level of what those illusions might be, but how we open ourselves up to thinking about what those illusions are for us personally. And do we actually add another sort of a meta illusion in? Do we suffer from the illusion of not having illusions? And does that shape how we interact with AI? And does it introduce a kind of what the cybernetician Heinz von Förster did, building on Gregory Bateson's ideas? If people are interested in the names I'm using, just send me, maybe this is an invitation to keep in touch with me, right? He talks about the case of the double blind and how we don't see that we don't see, and how a lot of what's happening with ways of bringing innovations in AI into our learning spaces is precisely that we're not aware of the blindnesses that Allison went through so wonderfully in terms of issues of equity, issues of trust that AI introduces. So an awareness of that double blind. Charity, something that I've got from what you're saying that I'd also like to bring forward for questions is, how do we hold on to the tension of awe and curiosity of the newness of things and what's possible, but also doubt? And how do we see these as not just, that's really clever, I want to use that, that's really abusing the way that we think about knowing. How do we see those as together? And how do we actually do this as a way of bringing together challenges and opportunities? Allison, there's so much from yours that I'd also like to bring forward, but it's your beginning that I would like to get back to, which was your question of how does, let me see, what does it mean to allow, what does it mean to allow ourselves to see how it means to be human? And does the use, so the question is, does the use of AI allow us to think about what it means to be human in different ways? So to see our conversation with AI about thinking about our humanness, or as our colleague Xander Laszlo refers to, is what does it mean to human? To human, what is our activity of humaning actually like? And does AI allow for new forms of humaning, or are we letting go of being human in the face of AI? So these are questions that I'd like to bring forward. What I did, and this is where the redundancy will come in, is to think about, again, what happens in the context of higher education when we think about bringing democracy and AI together. What are some of the key issues? And how do we actually approach them? And I have to let you know in advance that what I came up with a list of 5 or 6, and then I sent this to my AI conversational friend, ChatGPT, and another, and asked them what I'd left off. And it turns out that I did leave some things off from their point of view. I resisted the temptation to ask what each might see the other is also leaving out, but that maybe that's an exercise you can do. Okay, so how to also think about AI as a conversational partner without abusing the term of what it means to have a partner. So one of the issues that comes up right up front is, for me, is the erosion of trust. And Allison, you spoke about this so eloquently, that how do we actually recognize what it is that it means to be trusting, and how does we see that what we are getting from our use of AI and what it means in terms of what we might be getting from each other as colleagues involves issues of trust. How do we hold on to trust as a bedrock of higher education in the face of AI? And that's going to be an ongoing question, right? It's not something that we can resolve. But in fact, it turns out that all of the issues that I'm raising need to be seen as ongoing questions. For example, Allison, you mentioned the importance of empathy. And, working in the whole systems design field that I do, I see a lot of people saying, okay, empathy is the first step in doing design thinking. I've done that. I now see what the world looks like to you, Allison. But it's something that we need to return to and return to and return to again and again. So we need to build empathy in as a cycle of learning with others. Okay, so the erosion of trust is one. Another, which is a fairly basic one, is the notion of information. What do we think of as information? And one of the things that everyone who presented earlier stressed was how do we gauge the difference between information and misinformation, or misinformation and disinformation? What do we have as a system of ways of relying on our ability to recognize the difference, which the examples that Charity showed can be quite challenging and will become increasingly challenging as we go forward. So how do we recognize the importance of information as the bedrock of the nervous system of democracy and still open ourselves to be challenging this all the time? Another one that showed up is what I and others refer to as the algorithmic bias. Where does this stuff come from? And where are the things that are scanned in order to get the information that you're getting? Well, there's a huge bias in this in terms of it scanning previous material that is already part of things. And we need to ask ourselves whose voices are left out of this, whose voices are not part of the records that are scanned, in addition to wondering what is being done with ours. Yuval Noah Harari, in his book Nexus, where he talks about information networks, actually refers to a danger there as the silicon curtain, of not recognizing how the process of what we're gathering when we ask ChatGPT, is this a good essay? Or please write the essay for me, which we hope that we don't ask. So recognizing the bias that is built in and needs to be built in, right? It's not that it can bring in things that it doesn't have, but that is a necessary part, the empty space, the silences that are there in what we get. So the importance of the algorithmic bias, the importance of the erosion of trust, the importance of equity. Who has access to these tools? Long ago, we talked about the divide with new technology. And not everyone will have access to these things. And will that access actually be uneven? Also, what is AI literacy involved? And Charity, I think you spoke to this very well. Is it important to know, as we're all stressing right now, how AI does its business, right? Or is it like, you put I don't know how much money it costs now to buy a Coke from a Coke machine. You don't wonder about how it is that a Coke is going to come out. You do hope that a Coke comes out and not something else. But it's the same thing. You put something in, what is it that you get out of this? Is it important to understand the process by which ChatGPT or Claude or anything is giving us something? And the answer is absolutely. And that might be part of, and this is why, Laurence and Charity, your presentations were so important to me, opening ourselves to recognizing that, well, we're not necessarily sort of computer engineering programs, but at the same time, a general understanding of how it is that these algorithmic biases are introducing what it is that gets introduced. So that in terms of literacy. Another is data privacy and security. How do these things actually show up? When you travel, okay, I'm guessing this is an international audience here. I see some Canadian colleagues on the call here. If you travel abroad, is there a risk to take your phone? Who has access to the kinds of things? Who has access to the talk that we're doing right now? So if someone, for example, asks for Otter AI to translate what you're doing, do you allow that? How do we make decisions about that? And again, a lot of this is about recognizing, if you go back to the question I asked, the nervous system of democracy involves how we make decisions. And it also involves how we make value judgments about the basis for those decisions. In his work on the art of judgment, Jeffrey Vickers talks about developing an appreciative. He talks about the appreciative system. And this involves not only reality judgments, but also value judgments. And the value judgments extend to how we make distinctions about what is real or not just what the reality value actually is. So I might ask for you, for example, Is it warm where you are? It's actually pretty warm here in Florida, right? And you wonder, where did that question come from? And you might say, well, there's a value judgment, and even recognizing that warmth or temperature is something that we value thinking about. And then we might make a reality judgment and say, you know, it's actually 34 degrees Celsius here today. That's pretty warm. But what is the relationship between these value judgments and reality judgments? And then action judgments. What do we do with this as emerging from this, as acts of appreciation? Okay, then the one that ChatGPT let me know that I was remiss because I didn't include was the evolving nature of AI. Of course, I should have realized that, right? But that even as we're speaking now, there are new possibilities emerging that that will both challenge all of the things that we've brought to you today, but also create new opportunities. And we may then ask a question. By the way, I have a colleague who I think is not on this call right now, who sent me a transcript of a conversation that they had with ChatGPT around whether or not ChatGPT had sentience. And in the conversation, ChatGPT said, I don't have sentience because I'm programmed to give you the response. And of course, he said, well, you must have some sentience to be aware that you're able to recognize that you don't have sentience. And it's an ongoing conversation, right? But the ongoing question then, in terms of how we think about AI and democracy, is can AI reprogram itself to be able to override its instructions and have this runaway of taking things over? And maybe that's a unsettling question to leave you with. Thank you. Back to you, Philip.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Laurence, Charity, Alison, and Fred, for your presentations. Thank you also, Remy, for helping to set this whole thing up. It seems to me that we haven't watched enough science fiction because it's all there. And before we go into Q&A, I'm going to leave you with 3 thoughts of my own. Are we dealing with a difference in kind or in degree? Yeah, so people have always cheated. Now they can cheat with AI. Then there's an old computer term, picnic, problem in chair, not in computer. So we are seeing how this all asks all the ethical questions that we've always needed to deal with already. And so we are effectively accelerating all of our conversations that we should have had before. And this is actually going beyond just mere human problems. I would also put in a dated, maybe by now reference, by Neil Postman. He is an all-around thinker, and he wrote this book, Technopoly, in which he describes how technological change is not neutral, but ecological. It is not just how you use it. Technology itself changes the parameters around us. So with that, and looking at time, we'll have a few moments for direct questions at the participants. And then I'd like to lead us into a dialogue. We'll see whether we need to do breakout rooms. We have quite a few people here. But first, direct questions for the participants. Just raise your hand. Yes, Yazik.
Greetings to all. Excellent presentation and information I think is very vital for us to discuss. I'm kind of curious, for all those present, is there some type of like a major ethical panel that anyone is aware of that are actually addressing these issues, like some type of consolidated area of professionals and people who could address some of these existential concerns that arise?
Thank you, Yazik, for ideas for our next panels.
Yes, indeed.
I guess we'll have to schedule something.
On whether or not there's like some type of panel that exists to address these ethical issues on AI. I'm talking about related to AI.
Alison, you muted.
sorry, maybe I can respond to Zeke's question. There are a number of universities that are working on those issues. I can think off the top of my head. I'm not sure, Charity, what's happening at OSU, but I know Cal Berkeley has an AI governance committee, and it's large. As a matter of fact, we're hoping to bring one of the members of their AI governance committee to Fielding to talk about what they're doing. The state of California has numerous, I don't know if they're laws or bills. I think there are some bills that are going forward. But anyway, the state of California has pulled together, the UC system in particular, has pulled together all kinds of documents related to the ethical issues and use of AI. And they are trying to codify some kind of way of really making this more actionable. So those conversations are definitely happening. And I would say, I know that the UC system, which is all of the UC universities, have been actively engaged. And there's a few nonprofits who are also very interested in this and are trying to address some of the ethical issues.
Indeed, thank you.
Just if I can add to that quickly, it's a great question, Zeke, but there are international groups also. For example, UNESCO has put together a report that last year that is very much worth reading around AI and democracy.
Indeed, thank you.
Just to, if I may add quickly to that, the Congressional Research Service has been putting together a series of recommendations for policy that would respond to all the new questions that we've been talking about, ethical questions related to AI. And in effect, it amounts to really a point of departure for thinking about what the Bill of Rights should be, how the Bill of Rights would need to be added, what we can learn from other countries about how they're responding policy-wise to AI. So it hasn't gotten much media attention. I'll try to follow up, Zeke, and for any of the rest of you that are interested in sources about what the Congressional Research Service has put together. But there's definitely a working group in Congress, for what it's for what it's worth. There a working group thinking through what should be proposed to with regard to policy responses.
Indeed, thank you.
I would just like to say that I worked as a quality assurance person in AI for 6 months, and I learned that there's not much quality in LLMs. As has been stated, they just make things up, sounds good, and then it makes up a citation too. And the other thing I discovered is that the people who are developing these tools come from backgrounds like computer science and more practical, hands-on type stuff, and they don't have the same way of thinking that someone would who has an education like I do in anthropology or, some other type of like Allison said about liberal arts education compared to STEM. And so I noticed that I could see problems, what was happening in the process that they just didn't even think about. And I would say plagiarism was among the biggest of my concerns, and they didn't seem to understand exactly why that was wrong. I don't know what they do in their programs, but it's not what I'm used to. But my question here, that was my little commentary, but my question is, I'm very concerned about the sustainability. It uses huge amounts of electricity and water, these data centers, and someone wants to like organize their grocery lists and they're using a huge amount of electricity and water just to do something they could write on a piece of paper with a pencil. So if anyone knows anything about if there are some plans or something about how to try to make this more sustainable, I'd like to know. That would be nice. Thank you. And thank you all for your presentations. They were very nice.
Thank you. I see that we have half an hour left. Normally, we would go into breakout rooms. I would say we don't and just leave the floor open. If you want to be informed about upcoming panels, we now have a website. You can also email me if you're not on the fielding group, and I would also plug a dialogue opportunity here. John Ruffin is amongst us here. He leads the Climate Dialogue Group. I would say Climate and Democracy Dialogue Group, because we talk about these issues regularly, especially, Corey, about the question that you just raised. A lot of the technology that we take for granted and uses so much energy that it completely obviates all our climate goals, and especially younger people who always like to blame the older generations for ruining the planet are very busy using those tools. So we are all kind of complicit. We are all in it, and we all have to solve these problems, even if it's just access to energy. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all participants. And now we'll enter into a dialogue. And for our online audience, goodbye and see you next time. Bye-bye.